it might give me like a more concise introduction, but then I was like, fuck it, I'm so sick of reading Keats that I'm not even gonna read this introduction. But I
Yeah.
did look at but I did look at my notes from when we read Keats.
Yeah. In school, undergrad?
Yeah, in undergrad. That's when I got this, dude.
You mean like for like the survey class? We took that together,
Yeah,
didn't we?
yeah. That was with so my notes aren't great.
Yeah. So I'll have to blur out that name to
Yeah.
bleep it out.
Oh shit, I didn't even think about the fact that we were recording.
Got a fresh vape, charged up.
He grabbed some balls and stuff.
What?
He grabbed some balls and stuff.
Yeah.
Bet he's seen some cock and balls.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, boys together do gay shit, dude. I mean, that's just
Yeah,
what
I'm aware.
happens. Yeah. Grabbing balls and ass. All right, yeah, I got about 5 pages worth of Keats notes, some completely illegible.
Yeah, good, because you're carrying this show.
All right, I'll carry it then. I guess we should say what this is. What podcast is this?
This is Heavy Board, and I am heavy.
And I'm Andrew Whitstadt. All right, so today we're doing Keats. We did this, I guess we did this preemptively, so if we just kind of picked Keats' complete works. I should say I know very little of the Romantics, especially for having graduate degrees in this shit. But I will say, if we're just gonna start initial thoughts, I not that I enjoyed reading this entire like 450 pages of Keats' entire like all his published fucking shit, and even some of his unfinished shit at the end there. I definitely have a better understanding of obviously Keats, but then of the Romantic period. But so like even though it was a slog, like I think I did get something out of this, which I guess is the whole point, right?
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing to me is one sort of like watching his growth over a relatively short period because he died so young. Like, I mean, so let's say we're talking about poems that he published. How old do you think? I didn't look into it. I'm assuming probably like not older than 17
Yeah, I would
or
assume
not
that.
younger than 17, I mean.
I guess when did he start publishing? That was like 1914, 19, no,
No,
18,
that would be,
18. Yeah, sorry,
yeah.
1814. I think 1814 or 15 because he died in 1821. I know that much at the age of
Yeah.
25. So,
So he was writing for like a relatively short period of
right.
his life. So like that was interesting to see, but also like there wasn't, I don't know, the shifts don't feel that major to me across that span, but also maybe it's because I'm like underread in the romantics and don't know a lot about the period and am not as keyed into those changes.
So we continue with our theme of being shamed into reading. Good. That's a good theme of heavy board.
Yeah. It's all about the shame and also like because, every time you read a book that like references Keats or hear a poet that you like talk very highly of Keats, you're like, "Oh yeah, I feel like a piece of shit."
Well, now that I say I've read pretty much all of Keats's published work, I can definitely feel more comfortable making a judgment on it. But yeah, I think that's the thing. When you did see this from start to finish, like that's the benefit of reading, I think, complete works like this is just you see the initial kind of immature young writer and you see that growth. And when you read, obviously you can only do this with people that are dead or have like large bodies of work that maybe they would publish in an anthology like this. But you get to see that growth, and I think we're going to talk about this later on, but I think you could see a distinct, not like very drastic change or anything like that, but just maturity in what he was doing. It at a certain point it stopped being what I would call kind of like a copy of Milton, where he was clearly very much trying to copy Milton, uh, and then
Well, he tried
became
to copy a
more,
lot of people,
well, as we all do,
but
but yeah, his biggest thing when he was young, that Endymion.
well, the other thing that I was gonna say, the second piece that was interesting was seeing like the interplay between him and like Shelley and Wordsworth and sort of how, the second generation of the Romantics, like, were kind of reading that stuff as they wrote and taking it
Right.
really to heart. But also, that's shit that I wouldn't have recognized without the help of a number of lectures.
Yeah, it's not necessarily in the book. There's some in the introduction that references his peers. But yeah, again, I'm not. We're both said this already. We're not that well read in the Romantics, and I'm assuming most listeners to this probably aren't either.
Yeah, and maybe it's because we just like don't like it.
Yeah, I coming to this fucking technology. All right, we'll just cut that out like it never happened. But
Yeah.
it's still recorded. That's I like this software. That's the thing we'll do. It does help prevent us from losing it when shit like that happens. So even though it looks like Skype fucking malfunctioned, or my,
Yeah.
yeah,
Or
whatever.
like one of us just has shitty internet and it could be
Yeah,
me.
well, the internet here is terrible out here. It's like every
My
t-
internet always says it's doing fine, but like every once in a while on one of these calls, it'll just be like, yo, your connection sucks.
yeah,
So,
same. And here in Vegas, it does cut out quite often, more than any other service I've ever experienced in terms of internet, like broadband service. Even when I was living in like a
yeah.
small bumfuck town, like the internet didn't cut out this much. I don't know if it's the wind here that like we really don't. Yeah, I don't know. I guess we put most of the power lines underground here because it is so windy, but it still seems to cut out all the time with these like cables. Anyway, yeah, what were we saying?
I don't know. We were talking about influence.
Right, how the book kind of sets up the like kind of sets up in the introduction his influence, but you can see Keats' influence. Like Keats, I mean, that's one thing I'd call the earlier stuff. It's childish. It's clearly immature. Somebody with great aspiration. Not that he's unskilled or something at that level. Clearly, he's studied the work, but you just you just tell when you're reading a book by somebody that's young that maybe.
Yeah. And maybe part of that is because some of those big ideas of the Romantic period can have a tendency to easily feel childish to us.
Right. And it's something I don't know
It's
if I would have.
sad. It's so pretty.
Yeah, I don't know
Oh.
if I would have noticed it if I wasn't older coming to this. Like if I was forced to read this in my 20s as an undergrad, which I guess I was forced to read some of his like more famous ones, which I'm actually not a huge fan of, but yeah, I guess my
Yeah.
overall impression is I came to this not being a huge fan of Keats and I left not being a huge fan of Keats.
Yeah. Also, the we should say like the introduction, the copy that we both have, like does spend the first paragraph and a half like shitting on his early work.
Yeah,
So
maybe
there's a
that.
chance we came sort of we already like weren't huge romantic fans and maybe had some space from it to be like, yeah, I could try that. And then read the introduction and just spent like the first paragraph and a half just shitting on him. And so maybe we took some of that to our reading, but also, yeah, it's a lot. And it made me actually like appreciate a lot of the playfulness of rhyme that comes like after the Romantic period.
Right. Yeah, and that's one thing too is even though we're not huge fans of the Romantics, that's no excuse to just not know
Yeah.
it. Like, yeah, it's not if we care about this shit, which we do. But yeah, it's a good. We should say what book we were. We mentioned this last episode, but for listeners, we're reading this. It's a Digi Reads publication, so it is. Unfortunately, it's a print on demand book you can get off Amazon, but it's actually for a print on demand book, it is quite decent. Usually those print on demand stuff, when you have stuff that's in the kind of, what do they call it, public domain, so anything that's old enough to not have copyright, or you can just publish it willy nilly.
Yeah, it's got this long, like 50-page introduction from Robert Bridges. But there's like, there's no like footnotes, there's no end notes or anything like that. So if you're looking for that kind of copy that has like more annotation, and more, you know, reference stuff, don't get this copy.
Yeah, and this is also, you should say, it's originally a digital, but you can get the printed or digital. We'll link it in the show notes, in the description, and all that, like we always do. But yeah, if you wanted to do a digital one, or we are purists, we like print. I like print books. I
Yeah,
find
I
it very
like print.
difficult to read if it's not on a print book.
As much as I like having footnotes, sometimes it's really not like it's nice to not have them because it's not distracting and you just sort of look up what you need to look up as you
Right.
go. Um,
And the thing with
but
footnotes
yeah.
is, it's like, depends who wrote them. So like, if you have somebody that was like good at it, it's actually very helpful and informative. But if you have somebody that maybe wasn't so good at writing these footnotes, they're kind of like, well, why the hell is that there? Like, they don't offer as much as they could sometimes. Depends, who writes the footnotes for this, all that kind of shit. But yeah, I mean, I honestly, when I was looking for copies of this, I didn't see like any kind of like definitive like Norton text, or any, not that it has to be Norton, but just like any kind of definitive
It's got to be
Keats.
Norton.
Yeah.
It's got to be Norton for me to trust it. Norton Critical.
Yeah, the Norton critical. I just didn't see any. Like, they didn't. I think they might have had a Norton, but it wasn't his complete. It was just
Yeah, sometimes they have,
selected,
like I said,
or
like the
yeah.
Cambridge Reader or like, you know.
I think I did see the Cambridge Reader, but it was much more expensive because it like has a,
Yeah, those always
yeah.
are all those critical essays. I
Well,
mean, it's
maybe
the same
we'll.
thing with like the Norton Critical editions, but yeah, I mean, honestly, like even getting like his selected if, you're starting out probably isn't like you could probably find that for a good deal too.
Yeah, used bookstores and stuff like that, you may get lucky. But even so, uh, yeah, it's not a
And
huge
if
deal.
like
Maybe we'll
yeah, and
link
if
we'll
you're
link
like new
both.
to it, if you're like really new to it, if you're like really new to reading like a full length collection of poetry, or you're new to reading poetry of like sort of an older time, I always recommend listening to the poems too. There's definitely like a full selected Keats on like LibriVox, so check that out too.
Yeah, that's something I had to do when I was reading through this book. Is I really did have to read it out loud to myself and sound like a fool. My wife coming in the room being like, "What are you doing?" And it's funny because I found myself like, I couldn't help but read this in like a British accent.
Yeah, I could help it.
Yeah, so I was like reading it out, especially the way that like some of the rhymes depend on a British pronunciation. Like, again, if you again, like the British pronunciation. But yeah,
Yeah, I feel like either way, I feel like I spent this whole time reading, waiting to get to his sort of odes period because that's when a lot of his like most famous poems were written. So like probably closer to the end of his career, because he died age 25 of tuberculosis. So again, not a very long career, and I was waiting this whole time to fucking get to his like you know famous phase. And then by the time I got there, I was pretty fucking bored,
same. Uh,
or just not bored, just like burnt out on it. Like needed a
what
shift.
what I kept noticing, and again, this is me ignoring everything I was supposed to read. Not like I ignored it, but like didn't really soak it in undergrad and stuff like that. Was like, oh, fuck the romantics, I wanted to do contemporary shit. What I kept finding myself thinking as I was reading through this, like, forcing myself through the boring parts, forcing myself through all these like long long shit, I kept coming back to this, being like, I don't think I like the Romantics. Like, I don't. I kept being like, I don't think Keats is very good. Like, which,
There's just, well, because when you're like you're looking at it and you see the all of it, you know? Like this is one of those moments where you're like, yes, okay. They are not
right?
all masterpieces, like the greatest poets write
Well,
many,
nothing.
many
Yeah,
poems that are like mediocre. And I'm sure, you know, that was true even at the height of his fame.
yeah.
Um, or even then, like, you know, a lot of this is probably resurfaced since his fame. Like a lot of the shit from his letters, like some of these poems were originally drafted in letters that he was writing to people or other poets or like, um, what's his name? Benjamin Robert Hayden, the guy, or who's the guy who did
I
is
have
it the Examiner?
I have no fucking idea,
Was
dude.
that the was that the fucking paper?
I have no fucking idea.
Well,
Uh,
there was this guy Lee Hunt. Yeah, it was the Examiner, I think. And he was the guy who put out the Examiner, I think. So a lot of this stuff got drafted in letters. But yeah, it's all the first thing that I noticed really early on was a really heavy emphasis on like uh, joy born out of misery
he
in
likes
some
misery.
way.
The
Loves
word
misery.
miseries as well. That word kept coming fucking all the time. And I
Yeah.
noticed he kept. That's I wrote it in my notes here, but I noticed that rhyme specifically with miseries came up quite a lot. He liked talking about this. It's like the first emo shit, you know, like the romantics, especially the young ones on the second half. There, they were like the first emo kids, right? Like they were young, they were obsessed with like the rush of life. Fucking,
Yeah.
I don't know. Just, yeah, they were doing drugs, they were drinking, fucking whores, and like chasing tail, right? Like
Yeah.
most of them
There
died
yeah,
young.
there are a lot of like responses to women or poems about like women that he had just like seen for an instant.
Yeah,
You know, again, he's like a 20 something,
yeah.
like an early 20 something. So it makes sense.
Yeah, I guess. Do you want to start at the intro to this? I have a few questions about that too, like his kind of chasing tail poems, but also towards the end, one of the last things he composed, right? That kind of love poem to Fanny.
You know, what page is that on?
Uh, I wrote it down in my notes here. It's on page 446. It's one of his last ones he completed and published before he died, I think. But I have a question about it once we get there.
Yeah.
But yeah. All right, I guess we should just start with the intro to this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a heavy intro.
Heavy intro, and I don't even know who. Intro by Robert Bridges. I don't know who he
Yeah.
is. I'm assuming he's like some type of romantic scholar in England somewhere at like
Yeah.
Bath University or like I don't know, Oxford or so. It's one of those fucking British schools.
Yeah. Yeah, he like breaks down all of sort of the poems, like not every single one, but he breaks down like the forms that he uses, the style, his diction, his rhythm, largely critical of Keats in the beginning and is very
Uh,
he is not shy about sort of um shitting on some of the early work.
yeah,
Right? What
and
does he say?
the very first sentence, dude. Yeah, that's like if one English poet might be recalled today from the dead to continue the work which he left unfinished on earth, it is probable that the crown of his country's desire would be set on the head of John Keats, and his general feeling is based on a judgment of his work which we may unhesitantly accept, namely, that the best of it is of the highest excellence, but the mass of it is disappointing.
Yeah.
That's the very first sentence of the whole fucking introduction, and yeah, it does sum it up.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and others again is unreservedly deprecate or depreciate him on account of that very want of restraint, which in his early work, besides its other immaturities, is often of such a nature as to be offensive to good taste and very provocative of impatient condemnation.
It's true, and you mentioned this already, but yeah, like the intro, how the introduction and like what you read before you come to a text like this, it's nothing we can help, but like how it does influence you. Like when you read certain critics, certain scholars, that will influence your decision. I mean, I guess it depends if you think they're right or not. I happen to, after reading this whole thing, kind of pretty much agree with Bridges on almost everything he says in this introduction.
Yeah, I mean, he goes on to he's also again really critical of what's the big long poem, Endymion.
Yeah, and that was his first big, big like I'm here, like look at me, kind of. I guess that was they
Yeah.
said that was his second volume of poetry. The one thing I don't like about this book is that I guess it's hard to do back then because the way they published poems was a little different than what we do now. But it was like I wish they had separated the volumes like they do in a lot of
Yeah.
collected works or complete works for more contemporary
Or
writers.
showed where they were told where they were published.
Right,
At,
maybe dates, and he does admit in the introduction that the dates we don't know exactly. We can just have a kind of a guesstimate on some of these. But yeah, and he grants right there on page 7, right, the first the introduction, third paragraph. Uh, when he's talking about like why so like when we have this complete works like there's so much of it. He said, why do we include all of it? It's like, well, it could stem from a feeling which editors have had that since anything might be of value, everything was, so that any scrap of his which could be recovered has gone into the collections. This kind of since he died tragically and all that kind of shit.
yeah, no, I mean, I think that's what we do, right? I mean, but that's also why we have some really nice fragments from Dickinson, who, of course, wanted all of her shit burned.
Yeah, the thing is that Dickinson, even though we should do that, we do plan to, listeners. We both love Dickinson, and we plan to go through her complete works eventually. But that would be definitely be like a 2, 3, 4 parter. But at least
Yeah.
those are numbered,
Yeah.
kind of in order. Like she kind of numbered them too. I mean, you have no control over this. So like once you're dead, I mean, yeah, it's up to whatever critics, whatever scholars decide. So if they're going to include you or not, which poems they're going to include. You see this all the time with stuff that maybe was a flop when it came out. I mean, Moby Dick, anybody, right? Like Moby Dick was famously like a flop when it came out. Nobody cared about it, and now it's considered like one of the greatest, American novels or whatever. Is that American? Yeah, Melville's American. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious to know what the first poem you marked was.
What I marked?
Yeah.
I wrote it in here, but I do have a bunch of shit about this kind of like before we get there, when he talks about there's this sentence when Bridges is talking about Endymion, so he kind of breaks down his introduction into a couple of different parts. There's this sentence on page 8. It says Keats thought to quote surprise by a fine excess, and I was just gonna that stood out to me as like, yeah, I wonder if Keats said that himself. You kind of get that from his work. Like it's a very romantic idea too. Like if you go about the
Yeah.
period, surprised by a fine excess. And I just wanted to ask you, like, do you think that sums up Keats? Do you think that's a good representation of Keats? Whatever.
Oh God, there was one that I thought was actually a really good summing up of Keats, but I don't remember where I wrote it down. It was one of the last poems I read.
What a line from an actual poem.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think that's accurate. I also think, you kind of see. I wouldn't say that characterizes every single one of his poems, but I do think that was the hope.
Yeah, like the ethos, like the goal, like it says
But
very romantic notion of this kind of, yeah, like divine excesses, this like rush of life, right? Like this kind of
yeah, the rush of life was really, really big, and that you see from the beginning. Um,
celebrate yourself.
yeah, we see it
Uh,
early when he's like talking, when he's imitating Spencer, and when he is writing about Byron.
yeah, and then there's a little bit of like influence, like Keats clearly was influenced by Wordsworth, but not just that. I mean, this is always right. You're more influenced by your peer group than almost anything else. So he was clearly kind of influenced by Wordsworth, and Wordsworth, I guess, was like one of the longer living romantics. He was like one of the only ones that actually lived to be like 80 or something.
Yeah.
The rest all died tragically, probably drunk or on drugs, or of like Keats' case, some type of illness that we have since had cures to, but didn't in 1821, like
Yeah,
tuberculosis.
you can feel the Wordsworth influence really strongly in the very beginning, in particular, I think. Or that's where it feels the most obvious to me. And again, this could be because I'm not well read in the Romantic period.
Right.
Um, Even poems called like Happy as England, I Could Be Content.
Yeah.
Um, Written in disgust of vulgar superstition. Um, I mean, these poems all I think kind of hint toward that like uh, sense of like encroaching industrialization.
And
Um,
I wanted to ask you this. I didn't think of it till later, but I started thinking about this like when I finished his collected works. I read this whole fucking thing, this big behemoth. Parts of it extremely dry and hard to get through. And then I was just thinking, yeah, like I don't think Keats is that good of a poet. So when I was like, man, what made everybody love Keats so much? What like cemented him in the canon? Because he was trashed at first by all the critics that mattered, especially Endymion was considered like complete garbage by all the critics in like Ireland or in Scotland and England at least. And then but I was just thinking, I was like, man, yeah. So he was friends with Wordsworth, and it's clear that like Wordsworth respected him. Like the dinners and stuff they would have, the drunken kind of conversations at night, long into the night type thing, smoking, drinking. I was wondering, like, if Wordsworth was responsible for kind of dragging Keats' legacy with him, since Wordsworth was probably the most influential, not just in Poetic, but by the time he was was a poet laureate, he was the one that lived the longest. He became very influential in politics and just like the general upper classes kind of bullshit, whatever that is, kind of.
yeah, I guess I don't know the answer to that question, and I didn't really look into it, but it would make sense. I mean, I can see how people would come back to the romantics, and especially romantics like Keats of the second generation, where a lot, like, we see a lot of reference directly to poetry, to the poet's role, to like, you know, sort of sublime elements, so but like not so much of like nature, but of poetry. And I can see how like poets would come back to that and how they would sort of be, just self-involved enough
Right.
to be really deeply interested in this idea of like some sort of poet, philosopher type, but
And,
also like partier type.
right. And I don't really know enough about British history either. So, but just based on the time period, I mean, this was kind of the height of the British Empire, right? Like this was, they were fucking everywhere. They were
Yeah.
they were just expanding nonstop before the crumbling in the 20th century. But it's like, yeah, I don't know. So if that has something to do with it, like the kind of excesses you can have from that kind of, I don't know. But yeah, and I guess we won't have an answer to that. Like this type of Wordsworth, like how much was Wordsworth responsible for making sure Keats wasn't lost to the history books or whatever. I don't know. I mean, I guess we'll never know. I'm not. Maybe some scholars that know all this shit will send us
Yeah,
any.
I'm sure someone knows. I mean, he also had like a lot of friends that were important and who
Right.
wrote to each other a lot. So I'm sure there were plenty of connections made there, in like sort of the unearthing of whatever. Like if Shelley was one of like the if Shelley was one of like you know, the hottest guys around,
Right.
and if they were in any kind of way in contact, but also like all of the friends he had. Like he was friends, with the guy publishing the work of like other
Right.
big names. Like there's just so much I
It's
think that could play into that.
it's still how it works. I mean, that's still how the kind of we trace this back all the way. Like, yeah, kind of part of that class that published the magazines, the newspapers, and like would look at your shit. I don't know. But what about like the Milton influence? There's Bridges references that in the introduction on page 30. We're just like, I mean, you can definitely tell that there's like this Milton. He was obsessed with Milton, particularly in the early part.
Yeah, when he was under the Miltonic influence.
Which I guess everyone was like. I guess yeah. The stuff in this uh, is what I would say.
Between
What?
so it was happening between the early spring of 1819, while he was still working on Hyperion, and then when he hang on.
Well, just you can see it like
Yeah,
even
that was like when he wrote his odes too. You see a lot of that apparently when he wrote his odes. I mean, you also see it like really obviously when he writes like about the lock of Milton's hair,
right.
you know. And that wasn't that. That was pretty, isn't that pretty early on?
Yeah, and then what I think is interesting and what I didn't notice when I was younger and like barely paying attention to this as I was reading through anthologies and stuff and survey courses was yeah, of course these guys were influenced by mostly. I mean, you could see the big ones were yeah Milton and Shakespeare. They all wanted to be either Milton or Shakespeare because those were the two that have this colossal kind of rippling effect in literature,
Yeah, there was a
especially.
lot of Wordsworth in there too, I think. Um,
I just mean especially at
and
this time, like
yeah,
they were the
yeah.
rock stars still. I mean, we still consider Shakespeare some type of rock star in some regard, but I mean, think back 200 years ago. I mean, yeah, this was
Yeah, well, they were all writing sonnets too,
right.
like sonnet after sonnet after sonnet. And like they weren't like amazing.
No, they weren't.
They still weren't Shakespeare sonnets.
Right. But yeah, you could definitely see that. So I kind of was like, all right, yeah, Milton influence, I can go with that. Bridges also calls his Ode to Autumn his masterpiece.
Yeah. I was feeling kind of bored around there.
The yeah, I will say Ode to Autumn. I think was probably one of the best when you think of his most famous ones. Ode on a Grecian Urn, and then Ode to a Nightingale. Right, those are like the most famous. I'm not a huge fan of those, but they're the big canonical odes of his that you read in all the
Yeah, there
Nortons.
were others that were really fun, you know,
Right.
like and felt a little bit like bitchy and that I enjoyed, like pensive they sit and roll their languid eyes.
And then yeah, the first couple poems, I mean, we get references right away. So I mean, not only does it show us it's like a young writer, but just like he's doing this kind of call and answer thing, and he's kind of writing to other writers and kind of you know interacting with them. Like right away, we get these kind of a sonnet to Lord Byron,
Mm-hmm.
fill for me a brimming bowl, all
Yeah,
this kind of
yeah. There's a lot to Byron. There's a lot that's just straight up addressed to people,
which
whether they're dead or living.
yeah.
There's a good bit of Spencer in the beginning.
Yeah. Chatterton. All
Chatterton was a huge, huge thing, which like I just don't get. But I guess that was like, you know, the image of like the suffering artist or whatever. That was like so sexy.
these emo boys.
Yeah. Emo boys.
Skinny, tiny little sickly emo boys writing about their passions.
Yeah. Who's gonna be a doctor?
That's right. He went to med school, but like, and then you notice, like, I kept noticing the Milton references were heavy as shit. So clearly, specifically, I would think Paradise Lost, which is obviously Milton's biggest thing,
Yeah.
the one that we still have to be, forced graduate students to read and all that. It's like, but he was so influenced by that, which makes sense because when you think of like, okay, who is writing this type of stuff? Before, people that he would look up to, the same way you look up to our writers now, more contemporary stuff. Yeah, of course, Milton was the big one because it was only what, like 150 years ago that like
Yeah.
Milton produced this huge work that everybody praised, like that people still puzzle over, write entire books over. So yeah, I mean, you could obviously see that, and also see like you could tell that there's a confidence in Keats, perhaps an unearned confidence, even in his early stuff, where he kind of keeps referring to himself as like a bard in the vein of Shakespeare, in this kind of
Oh
like,
yeah.
yeah,
Which also just seems really like true of poets to me. Like that's what I mean. I think that all of this stuff like is going to be attractive to poets because it kind of also plays into whatever hidden senses of grandeur they may have.
right, or not so hidden.
In many cases, not so hidden. I mean, certainly none of us was good at hiding it when we were like first getting into it. Like every time you wrote something, you thought it was the hottest shit
Yeah,
around. And
yeah,
that's true of everyone.
yeah,
It's true of everyone who writes shit.
yeah. And the Shakespeare references are everywhere. The first thing I noticed, and I texted you about this, especially in the earlier stuff, this does go away a little bit as you go through this book, and he starts to mature as a writer, and you can kind of see that as you go from poem to poem to poem. It's I texted you about this, the inconsistent meter in some of this.
Yeah.
What did you think of that?
Yeah, it bothered me in places, but again, it didn't bother me that much because a lot of the rhyme throughout his body of work, like later on, especially, is so regular. I mean, it's not unimpressive,
Right.
you know,
Well, so I mean,
but it's so regular and rarely breaks much, um, that I don't know, there was part of me that was like excited to see him fucking it up, but also like, yeah, there were places where it was just really annoying.
yeah,
Where I was like, yeah, that's just too many syllables.
but that was one of the nicer things about whenever you do read a complete works like this. I was like, all right, you can see the inconsistencies in some of this meter, and it was frustrating at first. But then you're like, all right, this guy's what, 17? You know, playing around with stuff that his idols did very well. So we're talking Shakespeare, Milton,
Yeah, and
uh,
doing it way better than any of us would have done,
yeah, and you
you know.
do see that there is a distinct, like when you start to see, okay, the inconsistencies start to go away, and then you start to see the kind of what we know as Keats in the canonical sense start to blossom a little bit. Like and then of course he's dead, so it ends. But like, it does
Or
start to
even
happen.
like there were places where I thought maybe he was like imitating like Old English or Middle English. I guess Old English a little bit. Or he like maybe he had been like maybe it would I guess it's Middle English, right? Like Chaucer is like Middle English.
Uh, uh,
Or is that later?
well, Chaucer, I think
I
is,
don't even fucking remember.
I think
This is
Chaucer's
so shameful.
straight Old English. Uh,
Yeah.
because if you don't read
Yeah.
a translation of Chaucer, then it's pretty fucking hard to understand. Or no, yeah, Yeah,
Yeah,
Chaucer
I
is
couldn't
Middle
remember.
English, and then like
Yeah,
Beowulf would be
like
like old.
Beowulf is like straight up
Yeah,
Old English.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, like there were places where I thought maybe like he was imitating Middle English a little bit, and maybe he was going through like a Chaucer moment, but that only happens for like a poem or two.
And honestly,
And it could
Chaucer's
be totally something else also.
yeah.
And Chaucer could also be like you could argue that Chaucer's throughout all this.
I mean, Chaucer's fucking great. Like,
Yeah.
talk about writers that like hold up, hundreds of years after. You can read some of those Canterbury Tales, and they're fucking great. Like, they're still good
Yeah. And
stories. Like
there's
you
so
can,
much like
uh,
ancient, Greek. There's a lot of yeah, like a lot of like, the big themes that would have been really popular among his favorite poets.
yeah. And I started noticing this like so I tend to agree with what Bridges said in the intro, where he doesn't say this outright, but he kind of says that yeah, if you look at like Keats' earlier stuff, it's when he's young, even younger than when he died. It's very indulgent. It's very kind of self-indulgent for him. Clearly, he was having a good time writing it, but it's not so much fun for the reader, uh, especially 200 years later. But yeah, and I noticed this especially like on just like an example of his stuff like being kind of indulgent and falling flat was hither hither love on page 110.
Oh my God. Well, before you even get there, this line from the introduction that he talks about Keats having written in 1819, um, where he said, "A solitary life engenders pride and egotism, but this pride and egotism will enable me to write finer things than anything else could, so I will indulge it."
Yeah.
So yeah, little little prideful.
And yeah, it's very and not even prideful because that can work if you're good enough. But it's like yeah, it's just especially the early stuff. So I would say like maybe even like the first 250 pages of this or something is just I would call indulgent. Almost I kept using this term childish, like more exercises than completed, seriously edited poems.
Yeah.
Uh, and then he'd get all excited at the exercise and like mail off a draft to like Byron or somebody. And
But there are those that like still made it into popularity, like on first looking into Chapman's Homer, that's an early one on page 83.
that and like lines rhymed in a letter received. All these like I was just like,
Yeah.
yeah, these are just good examples of his ambition.
And
Not
constant practice.
yeah, not able to measure up to like what he's actually producing, kind of, which is
Yeah.
common. I mean, this is just normal process of becoming, I guess, a writer or a great writer. But yeah, I thought those two specifically, I was just like, man, at this point, I was 110 pages in. I guess it's only about 50 pages of poems by then, but it was like, okay, I kind of see what Bridges is saying here, and I thought those examples worked. But then, yeah, I guess let's hit this when he hits his second volume, Endymion, a poetic romance. I would say this clearly is his attempt to not necessarily copy Milton, but kind of using this kind of myth, like Milton uses the Christian myth, to tell kind of an epic, and it's separated into books like Paradise Lost, all that.
Yeah.
These kind of long epics. It does fall flat though. I didn't make it through all of this poem. It was
I only liked the first lines. What was the first poem you said you marked? I think my first poem that I marked is earlier.
like in terms of like what I thought was good.
Yeah. It's funny because the first poem that I marked that I was like, I enjoy this, I realized, like, after watching that one lecture I was telling you about, I was like, oh, that's why I like this. It's because he was like copying Shelley and Wordsworth.
The first one I marked as like, huh, I'd come back to that one, and maybe reread it was To Miss Reynolds' Cat on page 207.
Oh wow. That's pretty late
Yeah.
down the road. My first one was Address to Hayden on 85.
Okay.
And
Actually,
that's
I
the
marked
one
that
at the
one
bottom
as.
of the page. I enjoyed it.
Put a little star.
Yeah,
I
there you
marked
go.
that one too, actually. Yeah, so I blew past that. Okay, Address
Yeah,
to
well, and
Hayden.
that's one of the places where the language begins to feel like more interesting. Great spirits now on earth are sojourning. He of the cloud, the cataract, the lake.
Especially
Who?
those. Sorry, yeah, those last 4 or 5 lines.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah.
But these will give us the world. Will give the world another heart and other pulses. Hear ye not the hum of mighty workings? Listen a while, ye nations, and be dumb. Which is actually just look on my works, ye mighty, and despair from Ozymandias.
There you go, yeah. Listen a while, you nations, and be dumb. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I love that poem. I thought it was good.
Little sonnet.
Helvellyn, I think, is from Wordsworth, though. The reference to Helvellyn.
Right.
Yeah, I wrote here Wordsworth on her first ascent to Helvellyn.
Yeah. And other spirits there are standing apart upon the forehead of the age to come. These will give the world another heart and other pulses. Hear ye not the hum of mighty workings? Listen a while, ye nations, and be dumb. I guess what is that? That's a sonnet.
Yeah.
So I guess I did mark that one. I didn't mark another one until Miss Reynolds' cat.
Yeah, I didn't mark another one. For some reason, I think I marked the first Ode to Apollo. And frankly, I don't know why.
Which one?
On page 105.
105?
Yeah. I don't even really like it. I'm not sure. I think I was just into the rhyme.
Yeah, I didn't mark that one. But I guess that's one that he is kind of known for, right?
Um, there are a few odes to Apollo. I don't know if that's the one. But yeah, after that, I didn't mark anything until... Yeah, this is another one. Oh, that I think I marked because the rhyme was just fun. Like, it was like the fun, sort of easier poem, and it wasn't very serious, but it was on 210.
The old to Apollo? Or no?
Uh,
Which
oh,
one?
blush not so.
Oh, blush not so. What I noticed a lot about Milton was the first stanzas were often very well constructed, and then they do tend to fall apart a little bit. I think Bridges mentions this in the introduction. At least his younger stuff that tends to fade away some.
Oh, yeah. And on the 2 pages before it, those several poems I marked as well. And those are On Seeing a Lock of Milton's Hair, On Sitting Down to Read King Lear Once Again, and When I Have Fears That I May Cease to Be, which is another popular one.
What? I didn't mark any of those.
208 and 209.
Yeah, what did you think?
I was just interested to see the Milton references later on. I mean, they're throughout here, you know. But it just sort of, I don't know, anytime when he wasn't like writing sonnets or super long poems, I got kind of excited. But he that's one of the places where I was like, oh shit, you just use the shit out of exclamation points all the time.
Yeah, and I wonder is that a romantic thing? Again, I don't know enough about it. Although I think we've said something inaccurate on every episode so far, so keep the tradition alive.
Oh yeah.
We'll have some angry emails from some scholar dude in like Scotland or something.
Yeah, we don't know shit, okay? Get off my dick.
Yeah, get off Sophie's dick. Do you want to talk about any of those?
Yeah, no, I mean, I thought that this was one of the ones where I thought the ending was like not bad for one of the longer ones. I mean, it's not super long. It's like a 1-page poem maybe.
The lock of
But
Milton's hair.
yeah, but When I Have Fears That I May Cease to Be, I thought was pretty good. I thought um it was not that exciting for a poem that is, you know, so popular now.
Right.
And I think maybe one of the reasons why it's so popular is because it has one of those first lines that like everyone understands
Right.
and has like the immediate, like it provides immediate feedback in a way, right? Because you know what it means and you're like, yeah, I'm afraid of death. And it's like an easy read. Then on the shore of the wide world I stand alone and think, till love and fame to nothingness do sink. Yeah. Next one I marked after that, I don't think. Oh God. Well, his fucking songs I hated. God, get me through this. Like Folly song, when the wedding fiddles are a playing, huzzah for Folly, oh. When the maidens go a maying, huzzah, etc.
What page?
You know, like that's on 218. It's in the middle of his songs.
Songs. Yeah.
Or extracts from an opera.
Yeah. And this is where you could really see some of the growth happening. I did the two that stood out to me in this area of his life. I liked Where Be Ye Going, You Devon Maid,
What page is that one?
221. Like, basically him just lusting over this maid, like carrying stuff from one house to another on the street, I guess. All about fucking.
Ye tight little fairy.
Just fresh from the dairy. Will you give me some cream if I ask it?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
gross. It's
We
fucking
all know what he's
gross.
talking about. Yeah,
Behind the door, I love kissing more. Oh,
dude.
look not so disdainly.
Dude loves tits.
Dude loves tits.
Yeah.
I'll put your basket all safe in a nook. Nook is italicized there.
Yeah. I love your hills and I love your dales and I love your flocks a bleating. But oh, on the heather to lie together with both our hearts a beating.
Yeah, he just wants to fuck.
I'll put your basket all safe in a nook. Yeah, I'll put your basket all safe in a nook, baby.
Gross. He was like 5'1", guys.
Yeah, he was 5'1". I learned that in
Like
that stupid.
short. He was a short, stout ginger boy. Okay, like I don't know who the fuck he was lusting after, or rather, who was lusting after him.
Uh, I'm sure he was lusting after people. I don't know who was lusting after him. I guess supposedly Fanny. What's her name?
Yeah, well, her name was Fanny, so
Uh, yeah, I guess he loved her hills and her dales.
yeah, love those fucking Dales, dude.
And then one, uh, his song, a song about myself on page 245 was, I thought it was, there were moments of it that were a little lazy, but it is definitely one of his most fun and most interesting kind of diversions from his
Oh
usual.
yeah, The naughty boy. There was a
Yeah,
naughty boy. A
yeah.
naughty boy was he. He would not stop at home. He could not quiet be. He took in his knapsack a book full of vows and a shirt with some towels. Yeah, I mean, it's fun. It's definitely fun, and it's maybe like the shortest lines of this entire collected.
Incredibly short, especially for the period. But like
Like
it's a fun.
2 word lines, like is crazy to see in this book.
Yeah. He took in his knapsack a book full of vows and a shirt with some towels, a slight cap for nightcap, a hairbrush, comb ditto, new stockings for old ones, would split this knapsack tight its back. He riveted close and followed his nose to the north, and followed his nose to the north. And yeah, my note here is yeah, most interesting form, but the end of each stanza is lazy.
Yeah.
It's more sing song. It's like that song.
It feels like, it feels like a children's poem.
Right.
Like it feels like a step below Stevie Smith.
There was a naughty boy,
He
and a naughty boy was
was a
he.
naughty boy.
For nothing would he do but scribble poetry.
Oh God, that's what Kim had to walk into.
Uh, he
Jesus.
took an inkstand in his hand and a pen big as 10 in the other, and away in a pother he ran to the mountains and fountains and ghosties and posties and witches and ditches and wrote in his coat.
Yeah, there's a reason why that probably wasn't getting published.
Yeah, but that's also it was a lot of fun for me to read, so I
Yeah,
marked
of
this
course it's
down.
fun because it's not like a super serious poem. And like honestly, in those moments, it was like nice to have a breath from all of the like, oh, joy and sadness, but oh, poetry.
Yeah, like I said, this is the most divergent in terms of what he would normally do in his style. How quickly this is, how short the lines.
Yeah, I felt the same way about two or three posies on 320.
Which one?
Two or three posies, 320.
Two or three posies with two or three simples, two or three noses with two or three pimples, two or three wise men and two or three ninnies, two or three purses and two or three guineas.
Yeah. Honestly, I was like kind of surprised to just see like pimples and eggs in in a Keats poem, especially in like a single Keats poem. Felt very surprising to me. And of course, after that is Ode on a Grecian Urn. And I will admit, I mean, like, we all fucking know there's way more depth to all of this than I am able to, with my little to no knowledge of the period and of Keats himself, actually like discuss. I do remember that Ode on a Grecian Urn was like some bit of commentary on the pastoral.
I am not. I didn't. I'm not a fan of this. Although, yeah, this is probably his most famous. At least this is the one they always talk about, like on master's exams in English literature.
Yeah, beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all you need to know on earth, or that's all you know on earth and all you need to know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. Right before that, so assuming this is printed in order, page 289, just a random poem he did called "Song." A little 10-line poem, not quite a sonnet, but that was like the first one. That was the moment when I was reading on page 289 where I was just like, okay, that worked all the way through. There wasn't like a little lifting off at the end. There wasn't like a little uh, hiccup in meter. There wasn't any little like I was just okay. This is Keats just hitting that stride. I don't know why. Maybe it's because it was so short that I saw that on this one and not like earlier in the work.
Yeah, I don't like that one that much. That one didn't like do it. I mean, because to me, I this is like one of those little poems that isn't doing all that much, except sort of like, talking about death and grieving and song. Um,
Yeah, I
But
had a
like,
dove and
you
the
know,
sweet dove died.
yeah, that I mean that's one of the more matter-of-fact openings to a poem he's
Maybe
written.
maybe that's why I liked it so much. And I have thought it died of grieving. Oh, what could it grieve for? Its feet were tied with a silken thread of my own hands weaving.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a decent poem. It's not like
And it
that.
seems like it might be like, he has a lot of starts and stops. So we talked in his earlier stuff. Bridges says this. We kind of agree. I kind of agree. Yeah, like his first couple stanzas are usually good, and then the poem will tend to fall apart until his later years when we start getting to the odes and ode on a Grecian urn and stuff. And this was just the one I noticed right away. Where I was just like, okay, this could be just like a little fragment, like a little start of something that he just this one little stanza. Uh, but I was just like, okay, this works entirely in every way, and it's just like a small little example of okay, this is him reaching maturity. So that's why I pointed it
Yeah.
out at least.
I mean, I think Ode on a Grecian Urn is pretty great. Like, I think I actually tend to like that one a little bit better than To Autumn, but I also read that one fewer times. I read To Autumn fewer times, and as we know, familiarity does make a difference.
Yeah, I
And
liked.
I just straight up skipped his plays because I was like, I'm not going to have time to get there. And I just don't want to read Ortho the Great.
As somebody who read all the plays in this, you're not missing anything at
Yeah, I
all.
didn't think so.
His plays are mostly bad Shakespeare, not copies, but aspirations. So they're like bad kind of copies of some of the greater Shakespeare stuff. Uh, all kind of set in among, princes, princesses, kings, kind of, you know, betrayal, people trying to get the throne. Very, very Shakespeare wannabe kind of. And they do fall a little flat. I mean, most of the plays in this he didn't even finish. I think there's the only one he did finish was Ortho. Yeah, and I was texting
Yeah,
Sophie, yeah, like
good.
Ortho the Great, and then she was like, yeah, like Othello, and it's not quite. It's kind of like a blend of like King Lear and Othello. But yeah, and I always found myself drawn to his lust poems.
Yeah, you would.
Yeah,
Um, I like Grecian Urn. I think it's great. He doesn't overuse exclamation points there. Sounds great. O Attic shape, fair attitude, with breed of marble men and maidens overwrought with forest branches and the trodden weed, thou, silent form, dost tease us out of thought as doth eternity, cold pastoral. When old age shall this generation waste, thou shalt remain in midst of other woe than ours, a friend to man to whom thou sayest, beauty is truth, truth beauty, that is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know.
but yeah, I did mark Ode to a Nightingale. I guess did he write those one after one another? Because they're right after one another in the
I mean,
book.
they come right. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it seems like he was writing a bunch of fucking odes. Right after that is Ode to Melancholy.
Which would you say is his best, or which I guess you liked the Grecian Urn best? I liked Ode on Melancholy and Ode to a Nightingale better than Ode on a Grecian Urn.
I like Ode on Melancholy. Well, I mean, he has a lot of like on melancholy like throughout this collection, so it's kind of nice to see that ripen into something more, or like to be able to track the development of that idea, even though it's one of the more like prominent in your face ideas, like, oh, sadness, like,
Oh, self.
oh, sadness, oh, me. Yeah, I like Ode on a Nightingale a lot, and I like Ode on a Grecian Urn a lot. I feel like I should read To Autumn after this. His
If
On Fame poems are good.
Yeah, and if this is done chronologically in the book, to Autumn was much later, right?
Yeah.
Which makes sense that Autumn is a little bit more mature
Yeah.
and kind of hits the reader a little bit more.
Yeah, it's 399.
Yeah, it's way back there.
which I marked the one right before that too.
Ooh, yeah. Let's see. I gotta switch pages. Yeah, and that's what I wrote in my notes here. Ode on Melancholy. I just wrote there. I put them. I marked the page, page 325 in this book, and then I was just like, "Dead." Ode on Melancholy is definitely about a bitch.
You think?
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of think like many of his poems are about bitches, or else they're about like, I don't know, wanting to be famous.
But yeah, I mean the very last lines of that, right? So, though seen of none save him whose strenuous tongue can burst joy's grape against his palate fine, his soul shall taste the sadness of her might, and be among her cloudy trophies hung.
Yeah, which one's that?
It's the last four lines of Ode to Melancholy, the last section.
Oh yeah.
That's what I mean. So it seems like maybe Song, where I pointed out earlier that one, it seemed like it could have been maybe like a first verse or a first stanza to an ode, but never became anything more type thing. Because it kind of follows
Yeah.
the same structure as as the odes, his more famous odes do. But one of my questions, because right after this, I mean, wait, do you want to talk about the odes anymore? I guess they're important, at least to his legacy.
Yeah, I mean, they're in every fucking. I mean, the odes are great. Like, read them for sure. They're interesting. They have more depth, I think, than some of the earlier stuff. I think the ideas he presents are a little bit more complicated than in their earlier sort of showings. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I spent a lot of this like waiting to get to those famous poems, and by the time I got there, I was like it's kind of over it. Kind of fucking over it.
Because one thing I noticed right after this, because right after these odes, they kind of put Ortho, whatever the fuck that is.
Ortho.
Yeah, Ortho the Great. Kind of this like 80-page 5-act tragedy that he wrote. And I was just like, man, it's all these poets. Why? What is it with poets that like? Why do they want to write plays?
So I want to be Shakespeare.
Yeah, that's what I was
And
thinking.
because like they're like, this is verse.
Yeah.
And at the time, like it, seems like being a writer, right? Like if you were a poet, strong chance you were also writing plays.
Yeah, I wonder if
Like,
that's where the money was.
eh, was there money in it? I mean,
Oh,
wasn't he sort of living a desolate life at the end
not
because
that
he
it,
didn't know he had any inheritance?
not that he was getting rich off of it, but just the idea of, he probably got, if somebody were to take this play and put it on, he'd probably get like a fee or something that he wouldn't normally get just by publishing a poem somewhere. Something like that. I don't know if that had anything to do with it or not. But yeah, there was only one line in the play that I underlined at all.
Hit me with it.
It's not like great. It's just I liked it. It's from the Albert character. He has this big kind of Shakespeare-like soliloquy, and he just says at the end of that big long speech to himself, very Shakespeare-like, because he's like by himself on the stage. He says at the end, "I must confess and cut my throat today, tomorrow. Ho, some wine." And that's the end of his like big thing, and I was like, all right, I like that.
Yeah,
Tomorrow.
that's kind
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be interested to like learn more and then reread some of this shit because I feel like I did miss a lot. That's always sort of the danger of trying to just read like someone's complete works, like this when it's like sort of chunky and there's a lot to get through. It's kind of dense, not all of it, but like because it's long enough ago that it's grounded in a history that like we are not as well acquainted with.
Yeah.
And yeah, it makes you like miss things. You miss nuance, you miss like what actually might have differentiated him, what made
Right.
him stand out from other poets of the period. So, but of course, at the same time, we don't know. We only know like the big ones like him, Shelley, as like the two really big ones of the second generation. And then before that's like Wordsworth and Coleridge. And before that, Blake.
Yeah. I was what I did. I tried to pull out Bloom's Western canon real quick and just see what he said. I should have done this before we started recording, but I was just like, oh, and it looks like he just skipped over Keats entirely. That was just me glancing at it. I didn't go back and like read a period, but it looks like he just kind of omitted Keats. And reading this, I was just like, okay, I can understand why you could kind of dismiss Keats from the canon easier than most. Partly because he's was so young, died so early, but also like, yeah, I mean, if we're going to compare him to the other greats of that period, does he really measure up to what they did?
Well, I mean, one of the poems in here that I like best is like the best line is like stolen from Shelley.
Which one?
That was one of those first ones that we talked about. Listen a while, you nations, and be dumb. That's the line that he stole from Shelley.
Right.
Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. And like some of this, I probably liked some of the poems that were just easier to read because, like, again, I'm a fucking idiot. So
We, yeah, and
not smart.
by the time I was getting to like the last 100 pages, I started noticing that he favored certain rhymes, he favored certain phrasings. Normal, like he kept rhyming. A rhyme that kept coming up was tapestries and miseries. They were rhymed together over and over again throughout the whole
God
thing.
damn.
Yeah. Tapestries, miseries, he'd use eyes often, and miseries, miserize. He'd have to pronounce it
Yeah,
to
the
make the
rhymes were
rhyme.
not that, like I said, they're definitely not unimpressive, but like they're not that surprising
Right.
either. So I think like there were also a lot of times where like, I think when you were talking about some of the excess, like it was maybe when, you know, why those really short sort of like when he puts like these really short sentences up front in a poem, like they jump out at us and we're like, oh, yeah.
Some of this stuff, and again, like it's playful, but it did strike me as like nonsense.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you could tell when he was just sort of dicking around.
Yeah, like the pensive they sit and roll their languid eyes, page 398.
Yeah, like that was just like fun.
Yeah.
But like I had to read a little bit more for context for that poem. Because I think there is a different title for that poem somewhere, where it's like a lover's party or something.
Yeah, I don't know.
And so that at least gave it context. And I was like, okay.
And that was right before we moved to his Autumn Ode, which what Bridges calls his masterpiece in the introduction. What do you think?
Um, Again, it's not my favorite. I'm looking to see. Like I like his other odes better, honestly. I do.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, you tell me what you think.
well, for this one, I thought the first two stanzas worked better than the last one, although I think that last line on page 4, or sorry, the last line of the second section, little is probably my favorite line in this whole 450 pages of Keats. And sometimes, like a gleaner, thou dost keep steady thy laden head across a brook, or by a cider press with patient look, thou watchest the last oozings hours by hours.
Yeah, I mean that's good, but still, like that was also like the one line that stood out to me as like the most interesting.
Yeah,
Oozings. It's
Oozing's,
not, that's
yeah.
an uncommon word for him, I feel like. But also, like, I think To Autumn is not included even in the Norton that I have for the Romantics.
Maybe Bridges influenced me more than I thought then on that. But that was that line where I was just like, oh yeah,
I mean, I
that.
know it's like one of the really fucking big ones, you know. But there were also others that we didn't talk about, like his Ode to Psyche, and like, doesn't he have one to Sleep? He has one that's like Sleep and Poetry. That's sort of a big deal. That might not be an ode and more of like a philosophy, but I don't know. But yeah, I think Grecian Urn, Nightingale, Melancholy are the ones I like best.
Yeah, and those are the ones he's really remembered for because they I mean, they
They
are.
hold up through and
Yeah,
through.
they are the better, like the best of his stuff. Yeah.
Norton confirms he started writing at 18. And according to Norton, they think it was on first looking into Chapman's Homer that he had found his voice. And that was one of the earlier popular poems.
Yeah, one thing I noticed as we read through, as we're getting towards the end here, where it's like some of his unfinished works, some of the stuff that he never finished, is they include in this collection, which is nice. But it's like, it is a shame. Like, that's when I started to realize, okay, yeah, it is a shame that he died so young because the second half, like the second half of this book and pretty much through the end, you see that blossoming. You see that blossoming of him becoming, okay, this guy not just has, I mean, obviously he's already, I mean, he is remembered as, one of the major voices of the period, but you could see it starting to happen. Like, if he didn't die tragically that young, he would be up there with Wordsworth and stuff that we remember from this period. Like, he probably would be up there.
I mean, he is up there. Like,
Yeah.
he's one of the most fucking remembered and celebrated poets of all time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like maybe Wordsworth a little bit more, but I would say, and maybe it's just because I have, a good bit of Anne Carson lying around that I'm inclined to think that people are drawn to Keats.
Well, because there is this drawing thing. Like, there was a lot of energy behind everything. Like, all of these poems, like, there was this. You talked about the exclamation points. Like, he was in love with the craft. I mean, he was in love with
Yeah,
the.
I think that's what it is. Like I said,
Yeah.
like I think, I think that's maybe a lot of what keeps us coming back to Keats was that sort of love of just poetry and fascination with it, and the fact that like it was okay for him to like write poems that were really heavily like referencing the craft itself. And maybe there's like some sense of like a loss of that right now.
Yeah. I just mean, like, yeah, you see that. Like, you see at the end, like, he's just beginning to actually do something, and then he fucking dies. Like,
Fucking dies,
yeah.
dude.
Which leads me to this question that I had is like, do you think, or was his death what made his reputation? Because like when an artist dies tragically like this at a young age, we tend to romanticize it a little bit more than if they live to the ripe old age and we got to see them be not as good in their old age and stuff. There's just kind of this legendary factor that happens when you're kind of taken before your time or you die before what we would consider a normal age to die.
I think it's entirely possible, but I also am like, man, like, I do think like he would have kept going.
Of
And I
course, yeah, yeah.
think with that amount of poetry and that amount of publication, well, how much was he published during his life? Actually, I don't actually know.
I think, I mean, it's just published as any of the others at that time.
Like, he had enough published, I think, that he would have had enough out there that was memorable that he would have appeared anyway.
Who
But I
was it?
also think that there would have been more,
Uh,
and that there would have been maybe even better poems. But then there are those like who have like young poems that I really like. Like when I cracked that Dylan Thomas collection that you'd sent me, it was like, one of his first early like lost poems. So I was like, one, this sounds like Hopkins to me, and two, like this is the shit. And I never like read a poem of Dylan Thomas. So I was like, fuck yeah.
Yeah. We should add that. We should add that book to the list, actually,
Yeah.
of things we plan to eventually cover on this podcast. But yeah, yeah, and that's what got me thinking. I was like, okay, so yeah, he definitely had that. I mean, and there is something to that. There is something to the kind of like live fast, die young, like this kind of the fast kind of burst of light from this young writer, and then he dies tragically. But like, yeah, maybe if we did live to see to see the decline, to see the aging, not as sharp, take him longer to write works, all that kind of stuff, maybe he wouldn't have been held up as high. I don't know. I mean, you think of all the writers that are forgotten, but even after his death, I think this was in that lecture I watched on the Cockney Romantics. So Keats, like kind of peer group, what they called the Cockney poets.
Yeah, the Cockney poets.
I forget the professor that did this lecture. It's on YouTube if you just search John
Yeah, it's from
Keats.
Gresham College.
Yeah.
I don't remember his name either. But he has like a whole series of lectures on the Romantics.
And he said something about it might have been Byron or Shelley. Yeah, somebody, whoever died off the coast of Italy, like drowned when he
I
was.
think that was Shelley.
Yeah, when Shelley was drowned off the coast of Italy, they found a copy of John Keats' poems in his pocket. Like he had like a copy of one of his books.
This Byron died. Didn't Byron die like early on in their careers?
Yeah, he was another one. I think they all died before the age of 40.
I mean, like early on in Keats's career, Byron died, didn't
Mm,
he?
I don't know. I don't know if he died before him. I know Byron was older when he died. I think he died at like age 36 or something.
Oh shit. I don't know. Let me see.
But yeah, I mean,
But
it's because
no,
they.
no, he lived longer. He lived 1824. He died just after Keats.
Okay. Anyway, yeah, so even after Keats's death, like his peers were still carrying around copies of his book and like reading it to each other, reading it to themselves, inspired by it. So maybe that's, maybe I'm not giving him enough credit for terms of like the actual how appreciated he was at his time and stuff like that, even though we don't have a large body of work. Although this is quite large for somebody who died at the age of 25 and didn't start writing until he was like 17, 18, at least, publishing.
Yeah, I think it was Shelley that died off the coast of Italy.
Yeah, well, then he was the one that had uh, like a copy of Keats' poems in his pocket when he drowned. Like, he was like drunk, dude, on opium or something. Bang.
Like for every like Keats ode, there is a Shelley ode. And then, well, hero isn't Adonis his elegy for Keats right after? Yeah,
I have no idea.
yeah. Elegy for Keats in 1821. Adonis.
I have no idea. But yeah, it's just always curious to me. I mean, everybody thinks about that. It's just something that's just fascinating me to think about. Yeah, well, how do writers get remembered? Because you think of how many writers there have been, how many years of writing. I mean, we're talking thousands of years. We're talking thousands of writers. I mean, hundreds of thousands probably. And we remember what, like 10, like from.
I do think it's funny. It says on this Wikipedia page for Adonis, the poem. Um, it was published by Charles Ollier in July 1821 with a preface in which Shelley made the mistaken assertion that Keats had died from a rupture of the lung induced by a rage at the unfairly harsh reviews of his verse. I mean, he was just being a dick. He
Yeah.
was just being funny.
I do miss that. I wish there was more playfulness in what we would consider
The
contemporary.
literary
Yeah, well, just
world.
not in the world, but just in the work to some extent. Yeah, like this kind of everybody has to be this fake humble,
Yeah, I
This
don't feel like there are the same kinds of clusters of poets actually genuinely like working together and enjoying poetry together. I think this is a far more playful, like these relationships that they had were far more playful. Like even like most people that I talk to, like there's no like writing shitty poems and then just sharing them with each other for the like fun of
right,
it. Like maybe like you're maybe one of the only people I do that with. Anyone else, it's got to be like very serious, you know? There's a lot less enjoyment. There's less like poking fun at each other. You have to be very careful in how you address discussing each other's work. And it's just fucking boring, dude.
right. It is. But part of like Keats, I wanted to talk a little bit about this. One of the last poems he wrote before he died. He wrote this poem to Fanny. Uh, in this book, it's on page 446. Right after that long fairy thing that he didn't finish, which I
Yeah, I
thought was actually one of his best epics. Like that's what I mean when I read that long fucking epic about these fucking fairies, the Cap and Bells or the Jealousies, an unfinished fairy tale that he was kind of telling in verse and kind of these numbered sections. When you get to it worked so much better than like Endymion or any of his other kind of like Milton like epics, and I was just like, damn, and it just ends. It just ends with like an unfinished like section and like a dot dot
yeah.
dot. And I'm like, fuck. That's when I wrote down in my notes like, wow, like we really did lose something when he died. Like he really was like blossoming into what would be considered a great, I mean, not that he's not considered that, right? But it's just yeah, that's where all that like, oh, what a shame to die so young type thing. Yeah. But that was right, and then I got to that two Fanny. So I guess let's tell our listeners about that. I don't know who this
Fanny
one.
Braun.
Braun. All right, whatever.
Yeah, it's Fanny Braun. She did not look that cute from this
No,
picture.
but supposedly there was like a relationship between them, and that's where he ended up dying in her care. Like when he was very sick in tuberculosis, like she took him in because he was like like a poor artist on the streets.
Yeah.
And it seemed like the relationship between them, my hunch, I don't have any evidence for this, but after reading that love poem to Fanny, so one of the last things oh God.
Yeah, that's a painting
Yeah.
too.
So one of the last things he wrote was this like love poem to Fanny. And when I read that love poem, I was just like, I don't believe this. Like I don't think he loved her like that. I think he used her because she was like the only girl that was like pursuing him.
Well, it doesn't even like out about her. Physician nature, let my spirit blood. Oh, ease my heart, O verse, and let me rest. Throw me upon thy tripod till the flood of stifling numbers ebbs from my full breast. A theme, great nature, give a theme. Let me begin my dream.
When I read it, I felt it was yeah. That's honestly this poem. Like I knew nothing about the relationship. I've never read their letters back and forth, like anything. I knew nothing. Just my pure instinct off of reading this poem to her. I was like, oh, this was he didn't. This was like something you write to like a family member. This is not
I feel like this is what you write when you know you're like dying and sad about it.
right. It was like his little like gift to her for like her like doting on him for like however long.
Don't leave me.
Yeah. It seemed like most phoned in love poem I've ever read. I wrote that
Yeah,
in
I don't
my
know if I'd say that,
I
but like, yeah, I wasn't. It didn't do it for me. I wasn't like a big fan of this one. It wasn't. Yeah, I mean, there were very few that were like, oh yeah, this is my shit. And maybe Keats just isn't my shit.
for me it was like Dude, like I believe fucking Nicholas Sparks' shitty, love stories more than I believe this fucking poem. Like that I believe this is like deep, undying, like unconditional love for somebody. This is just like Fanny wants a love poem written about her, and I guess I should give it to her because she's been so good to me. You know, whatever type thing. I don't know. And then after that, that's pretty much the last complete poem. Because other than that, it's just kind of fragments and unfinished stuff and things that look like they could be something, but yeah, like he was on his deathbed essentially and whatever. I don't know. But that was my last note. I was like, huh. Fucking Keats.
Yeah, he has this letter to her in the Norton. My sweet girl, I hope you did not blame me much for not obeying your request of a letter on Saturday. We've had 4 in our small room playing at cards night and morning, leaving me no undisturbed opportunity to write. Now Rice and Martin are gone. I am at liberty. Brown, to my sorrow, confirms the account you give of your ill health. You cannot conceive how I ache to be with you, how I would die for 1 hour, for what is in the world. Forgive me if I wander a little this evening, for I have been all day employed in a very abstract poem, and I am in deep love with you. 2 things which must excuse me.
Yeah.
I tremble at domestic cares, yet for you I would meet them. Though if it would leave you the happier, I would rather die than do so. What a fucking statement.
Let none profane my holy sea of love, or with a rude hand break the sacramental cake.
Sacramental cake.
Let none else touch the just new budded flower. If not, may my eyes close, love on their last repose. Yeah, that's how that fucking poem to Fanny ends.
Yeah, he definitely seemed full of himself. What softer words can I find for you after this? What it is I will not read. Nor will I say more here, but in a postscript answer anything else you may have mentioned in your letter in so many words, for I am distracted with 1,000 thoughts. I will imagine you Venus tonight and pray, pray, pray to your star like a heathen. Yours ever, fair star, John Keats. But apparently this letter parallels with Bright Star, which is a poem. But yeah, I mean, Keats, kind of a dick. Very short guy. Shorter than me, in fact. But wrote some good shit. Wrote some very mediocre shit, but also some pretty good shit.
Yeah, my overall, I'm still kind of in the, I'm not a big Keats fan.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan of the Romantics, period.
Yeah. But I do, now that I've read this, and we had to do a little bit, I mean, barely any research, but we did some research watching lectures and things to help us get a little bit of more.
Yeah, and a documentary or like some like kind of like fucking Encyclopedia Britannica film where a
from like the
40-year-old
70s,
man, yeah, it's terrible, and a 40-year-old man plays like a 20-year-old Keats.
Yeah, he's like a young Keats was just 19 years old, and there's like this 45-year-old guy, like kind of chubby, like sitting in like this chair by a fire. I get that, whatever, it's like a low budget Encyclopedia Britannica thing, like when I guess they did like a video series on BBC back in the day. It was like, yeah, there you can find that on YouTube. It gives you a little brief history of his life and all that. But yeah, that was funny. I texted you about that. Yeah, I was like, God, this guy's like 50 years old. I get that they weren't like making a Hollywood biopic or something, but yeah, that was fucking, yeah, I'm not a big fan. But I do understand now, like, yeah, like the reason that people are obsessed with this period, the reason that it's like the romantic period's considered one of the big ones, is because just like, like you notice why everyone's obsessed with the modernists is because whenever there's a movement that actually does change the game. So it's not just one writer, but this larger movement that, like, you know, whatever, it's in the air, and everybody starts, like, the game changes forever after that. Everybody kind of, you get obsessed with that because, yeah, I mean, there's so many writers, so many things that are published all the time, and we don't remember most of it. We
Yeah, but the
don't.
thing is, even for that, like it was so deeply entrenched of writing that came, like in the writing that was popular before his generation.
Yeah, yeah, but yeah, just those periods where, yeah, you can see the change in everything you're reading. I guess that's why I got when I was younger, I was always like, man, why are all my professors so fucking obsessed with the modernist? It's like, yeah, because that was the last time there was a huge fucking like earth shattering shift in the art
Yeah,
people were
it's like the
making.
one closest, like it's
It's
the
the most
one major
recent.
movement had that happened before the contemporary period.
Yeah,
So it's like the period that people were like responding to when we were growing up.
right.
Like even then.
Right, and it was just one of those moments where, yeah, there's no going back after this. Like, there's no going back to after some like a huge shift like that happened. There's no going back. There's only, yeah, going to forward. So yeah, I guess that's why I'm completely underread on this. So I guess we'll touch on some more romantic poets as we progress here in this fucking being bored and heavy.
Yeah, I mean, definitely been both of those things. In the process of reading this, I probably should have read my Norton introduction. That probably would have been useful, but what you gonna do?
Right.
There was a lot of feelings about the breaking up of villages and like industrialization and all of that shit, or like the early beginnings of it, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm not well read on that at all for somebody that's trying to be a writer, a reader, whatever, just a better
Yeah.
fucking well-rounded person that can talk about things that I claim to like. Yeah, man, fucking John Keats.
Yeah, and we get the brief Victorian era.
Right, that. But that's not as beloved
Yeah, for
as
good fucking reason.
right, but as the romantic again because it wasn't as like earth changing in terms of like the direction that everybody was headed.
No, that was like the return to values,
Right, this kind of like, yeah, stop.
morality.
Right, no more drugs and chasing Fanny. Pun
No
intended.
more fan.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's John Keats. What are we reading next?
Yeah. All right. So keeping with what we're doing here, we like to alternate between all the genres. We're going to do next episode. We're doing Joy Williams Pulitzer Prize nominated novel "The Quick and the Dead." I believe this was published in 2000.
Yeah, I was gonna
Uh,
say 2000, 2001.
yeah, and she was, yeah, nominated for that. Supposedly, this is her masterpiece. So we'll see. I've read some of her short stories. I wasn't a huge fan of her short stories, although when she nailed it, she did nail it on the short story collection I read. I think I read her collected. I can't think of the title of it now.
I haven't read any Joy Williams, so I'm curious. Guess we'll find out.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. We'll link that down below as well as this John Keats Digi Reads version.
Yeah, I'm just looking forward to a fucking break from John Keats.
Yeah, I was telling Sophie this as we were like struggling through sections of Keats that were just drawn out and long as shit. I had to start reading like old like noir like quick fast like pop novels because like just to get a little break from Keats at the end of the day. Just like,
Yeah, I split it up with ghost stories.
yeah, something
That was helpful.
to break up the monotony.
It's hard to go to that after reading Stephen King. it was
Yeah.
it was a pretty it was a rough shift.
Yeah, it's like, man, this requires a lot of the reader. Yeah, I like the abruptness. That's good. All right, yeah. You can contact us at heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. Subscribe to our Patreon to receive full uncensored episodes for subscriber-only content. Check out our YouTube channels. Subscribe for more. All the links to the books and shit in the description. And then, yeah, next episode we're doing The Quick and the Dead by Joy Williams. So we're looking forward to that right there. Reminder to listeners, we're looking for workshop horror stories. Send those to us at heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. Hopefully we'll get some good ones and we can start doing kind of like a segment on that. We're looking forward to that. Hopefully all you people way out there in the podcast world will send some good ones in. All right. This has been Heavy Board. My name's Andrew Whitstadt.
And I'm Sophie Weiner. Get off my dick.
Yeah.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Dinner.
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources. American resources.
Being bored?
Some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom,
Heavy.
I should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.